Hello, and welcome back to Storytime with Mary's Child Development Series. We are continuing our conversation with Baba Darzi, a clinical psychologist from Hearts and Minds Aloud. Hello, Baba, how are you?
I'm well, Mary. Always a privilege to be on Storytime with Mary.
Fantastic. And we love our conversations with you, Baba. It's been such a pleasure. And today's topic is something that's very close to my heart because of my 3 and my 4-year-old. We're talking about tantrums, how we spot a tantrum and how we support children to get through that tantrum and how we help children to learn with tantrums as well. So, Baba, I want to talk about tantrums firstly, and how do we spot when a child is having one or about to have one, and how do we deal with it?
Every parent at one point or another has seen their child go through a tantrum. And this is when you find that there's an outburst of anger or frustration or, some level of discomfort. And this is mostly because your child wants to express a need. You find it even with 1-year-olds. So baby tantrums are also normal. This is when the child is trying to express a need and doesn't have the appropriate language to do that. So, an outburst is the way of getting your attention or making it known that there is a need. For toddlers as well, you find that, yes, most of the time, the tantrum is also a way of expressing a need, or there is some form of a difficulty in emotion regulation. So, it comes out as an outburst. And this could even escalate to what we call a meltdown, which involves hitting and, kicking and screaming. And even for some toddlers, breath holding. You find that some toddlers will hold their breath as a way of expressing themselves. And this is also classified as a meltdown.
Because I think we've had a few meltdowns since the lockdown began. But how do we help children to work through these tantrums? What's the best way of dealing with a tantrum as a parent or a carer of a small child?
Okay. So we've mentioned that a big part of it is about emotional discomfort. Also, we mentioned there being a sensory overload. Okay, so most of the time, what you want to do is to stay calm and to wait out the tantrum. I mean, culturally, that might be difficult for certain parents to accept because most of the time you feel like you want to match what your child is doing or repress whatever need they are trying to express, especially if it's in public and it feels embarrassing. But a great way is to stay calm and wait it out. A lot of what we've done here has highlighted how important communication is between a parent and a child. So here, with helping your child through tantrums, you also want to be able to communicate with them, speak to them, and try to understand whatever emotion they are going through, whatever they are expressing, whatever they are feeling and, are expressing as a tantrum. And you also want to be able to reduce whatever stress or whatever stressful situation they might be going through as far as is possible with you. And then also, depending on how well you know your child, you would be tuned into tantrum triggers, okay? And then as much as possible, you remove them because I guess a big part of parenting is creating a comfortable or a nurturing environment that would help the child thrive. So once you are tuned into who your child is, you can pick out what these stresses or tantrum triggers are, and then you mitigate them or remove them altogether to help the child's well-being.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Barbara. And I think my own personal experience, I find myself counting to 10 a lot to try and diffuse the situation. You mentioned tantrum triggers. What are some typical triggers that could cause a tantrum in, say, a 2, 3, 4-year-old?
Well, hunger is a big part of it. And I start with that because I guess that even adults can identify with that. And again, like we said, I guess if the child is having a hard time explaining that, it feels easier to act up and then get your attention. Tiredness can be one of them. Being in an environment where they are immediately able to sleep. We spoke about sensory overload. So depending on the child's sensitivity, excessive noise, excessive lighting, and, crowds, excessive activity in the moment, may be too much for them to handle. You expect tantrums to stop or to start to decrease after age 4. Some children might still have them. And this is when you want to consider if there's a bigger problem, in which case speech difficulties might be something you want to look at, where delayed speech is, having an impact on the child, again, expression and having a bit of an impact on the child's mental health on the whole. So you want to look at that and make sure that the child is meeting their developmental milestones in terms of speech. And if not, you want to get them additional support with a speech therapist. Some of the time, apart from emotional tantrums, you find that there are power tantrums where what the child is doing is basically trying to test your authority and then assert themselves. So, for example, if you're trying to get your child to wear their coat or, put on their socks and they won't do it for no, quote, valid reason, it's probably them trying to say, okay, I don't want to do it. And, I want to see how you respond to this. So, power tantrums are also totally a thing. And that's also another thing that parents also want to be able to address.
Perfect. Thank you, Barbara. And this is touching my soul because with such young children, tantrums are a daily occurrence, especially in the lockdown situation. Okay. So, Barbara, one thing I want to obviously touch on, because Storytime and Mary, we're all about education and supporting children through education and how do we support children to learn better. I want to talk about how tantrums have an effect on children's learning ability. So, some kids, they may be doing an activity that they don't necessarily want to do, or they find boring, or they find hard, and that can cause a tantrum. So how do we support children to learn, through these difficult tasks?
Okay. So I think this is very much in line with what we spoke about a week or two ago, about creating the best learning environment for your child. Yeah. Okay, in terms of orderliness, in terms of having everything that the child will need to learn, making them accessible. Okay, for example, in terms of noise and lighting, you also want to make sure that the environment is conducive generally. We also spoke about the fact that the child should be in a good place emotionally, to be ready to absorb whatever it is that they are learning. So we've spoken about hypersensitivity. If they're already frustrated by something else, you want to be able to help them calm down. So we refer to how we help children go through a meltdown. So if it means removing a certain stressor, or understanding what it is that whatever trigger it is that's working now, you want to be able to take that away. And then for tasks that seem extremely difficult, because they are new tasks or the child has already been introduced to it, but they are trying to work their way through, you might want to break them into different segments. Okay, you might not want to feed the entire task to the child, but you might want to let them, as much as possible, split it into parts. So once they are done with the first part, as little as it might be, you bring the second part. And then probably once they are done, you let them understand that this is the entirety of the activity or of the work they've done. And that's even some form of encouragement and motivation for them, knowing that, I was able to do this after all, right? Because sometimes it might feel difficult or overwhelming, depending on who the child is, to think of, completing a task that seems complicated in one sitting. So breaking tasks apart can also be strategic in, helping or managing the frustration levels of children when they are learning.
Perfect. Thank you. That makes perfect sense. I think you're right. We did speak about this briefly a couple of weeks ago, just around how we support children to learn in the best environment possible. And I think, obviously what you say makes perfect sense. But what about us as parents and carers supporting children to learn? Personally, I've been at home for 4 months, and as a mom of 2 young kids, it can get frustrating being at home, trying to help, the kids to learn. And so how do we as parents try not to have our own tantrums around our kids, and how do we help ourselves to calm down, basically?
Yes, that's definitely a prerequisite to helping your children overcome tantrums. Because we mentioned emotional regulation, we mentioned calming down and all of that. If you are unable to regulate your emotions as a parent, it is almost impossible. You might not even understand the value of regulating yourself emotionally, so you can't pass on that knowledge to your children. And I believe a big part of that is being aware of your emotions, being aware of who you are emotionally. So being aware of your own triggers, okay, what pushes you, what gets you angry, what makes you frustrated. You want to be able to maybe move away from those things or teach yourself to deal with them better. Okay, we may not have enough time for examples, but globally, the idea is that you want to be able to know what your triggers are, and then you manage them. Sometimes, it works to stay away from those triggers if they are not a core part of your life and you don't have to deal with them. If you have to deal with them, then you maybe want to work on your perception of those things as triggers. Maybe work with them better if there are things that you can't escape. Okay, so sort of teaching yourself self-control. And then with that understanding, you're able to pass it on to children. That's what will help you count to 10. That's what will help you count to 10 or stay calm or say, sort of de-escalate or stay on this level and this might pass. And then I address what the problem is after. So it's a similar thing. The same thing we do with children, we want to do and master with ourselves so that we can pass on those learnings or lessons to our children as well.
Perfect. And I think personally, I said I count to 10 when my children have tantrums. I count to 10 when I feel my own self getting stressed as well. Sometimes 20, just to make sure that I can be calm when I'm talking to my kids. So, Baba, thank you. This has been absolutely fantastic. As you can tell, tantrums are very close to my heart. Yes. So I think it's a really important topic for parents to hear about as well. Baba Dazi is a clinical psychologist from Hearts and Minds Allowed. Baba, how can we get hold of you if we want to get more information about what you do?
Yes, Mary, I'm on social media as Hearts and Minds Allowed on Instagram and Facebook. And if you would like to send me an email, it's heartsandmindsallowed@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Thank you, Baba. It's been a great conversation. I'm absolutely loving our conversation. So we'll talk again next time.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all mine, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.